Hello, love. Welcome back to another episode. So, today we are going to be talking about 3 principles that I pretty much live by, not only as a women's health coach, but as a regular person. Now, before I delve into these principles, I want to say something. The guy that just drove by in his diesel truck is obnoxious. Like, that was completely unnecessary to diesel roll like that. And oddly enough, it wasn't my boyfriend being annoying this time. But number 2, I promised you all that I was going to do a deep dive into the whole lab-grown meat situation. But if I'm being fully transparent, there is so much BS that I just can't even give the energy to it for its own episode. So I'm actually going to rope that into today's episode towards the end, so make sure you stay tuned. And before we jump right on into the 3 principles that I use that you should definitely try, I want to say just a big thank you to all of the women who joined the reset in the first round. There were 47 of you who have joined live in the challenge, and I think there was about 20-ish of you that actually ended up joining the private chat, group chat on Instagram. I want to say thank you. Just so much information and feedback has come through, and I'm so excited to develop the program more. Also, if you are listening to this before July 1st of 2023, please go ahead and get your hands on the reset now. The price is going up July 1. And that's because value is also increasing and going up. Now that we've gone through this first challenge and I got the feedback, I'm just excited. Some of the things that people have said, actually, you know what? Let me just pull it up for you on my phone really, really quick because I haven't shared enough wins about the reset. So one of the first things that was said was just do it. I'm happy I have these tools whenever I need them. The second person said, the way it was done was so great. And then another person said, detoxing and hormonal support can be simple and not stressful. Then one of my favorite people ever, she's just such a sweetheart. She messaged me today and said, breaking news, I got my period. Barely any cramps, hardly noticeable. I am in shock in the best way. I haven't had to take an Advil. Thank you for the work you do. So I'm not saying you have to join the reset. What I'm saying is that is only 4 testimonials, and I have an influx of them coming into me week by week, with people sharing different results about their energy and their skin and now their period. And so if you have been looking for something that's actually doable, that you can actually integrate into your routine without overwhelming you, this would be a great place to start. I will leave it linked down in the show notes. Right now it is $55, and I think come July 1st, it'll be up to $99. Again, I'm just giving you a heads up so you can't say I didn't tell you. Now, with that said, let's roll into these 3 principles that I use as a women's health coach that you should definitely try. Principle number 1, stress less, live more. Translation, when your cortisol levels are high, it makes everything else more complicated. So I really emphasize simplicity and efficiency in my own wellness routine, and I actually teach my clients to do the same. The reason I teach them to do this is because it allows them to stop stressing out and to start enjoying life more. It allows them to decrease their cortisol levels without having to feel completely out of control of their body. And it's almost this secondary thing that we do. I tell them, embrace the philosophy of stress less, live more. And in turn, the cortisol decreases, okay? And the reason I would recommend that you try this is because there's a lot in our society that does inundate us and overstimulate us, and that negatively impacts the way that we feel. And so I just think it's really important that you give yourself, as well as your body, the chance to stress less and actually live more. The second principle that really guides me is add rather than subtract. Now, this is something that I would argue has been adopted over the last 2 months, full-fledged in my life, and that's because I realized how restrictive syncing with your cycle and eating in sync and all of those things actually became. Now, I will admit, when I first started these practices 6 years ago, they were great and they really did serve me until they didn't. And when I realized I was eliminating things I loved and feeling stressed out or anxious if I did have a piece of cheese, for instance, or did enjoy some cocktails, when I realized that those things were really controlling me, I realized it was time to add rather than subtract. The whole concept of don't eat this, don't do that, so you can balance your hormones and stay healthy just really feels old to me. And it seems like you're in this state of lack. So rather than eliminating things, I am all about adding the right things in. For instance, if you know, you want to have a cocktail, right? I feel like I'm always using this example, but it's the one that I quite literally feel like I'm using at least once a week. But I want to have a cocktail, right? So I'll have my cocktail and then I'll make sure that I have activated charcoal, either before it or after it. Why? Because this is helping bind the toxins of the alcohol and helping my liver eliminate things, detoxify, and then make its way through the rest of my digestive system, right? And I think it's really important that we focus on that. Perhaps you're somebody who likes caffeine, or you notice you have a caffeine sensitivity, right? So what would I recommend that you add into your routine? Protein. Pair your caffeine with a protein. Why? Because it's better for your metabolism. It's better for your energy. And it's as simple as that. Oh, well, what about gluten and dairy? Friend, invest in higher quality pasta, invest in higher quality dairy. Now, I know that everyone has a different budget, so I do try to be mindful of that, but it's also those little tiny tweaks that you least expect that really do make some of the biggest differences. Now, one of the things I mentioned when I said add rather than subtract is lack. So I have to be 100% honest with you. I've had to do a lot of money mindset work recently, and one of the things I realized is there were areas in my life where I felt like I was lacking and really not operating out of a state of abundance. And one of those areas actually happened to be the way that I was eating. I was literally physically telling myself that I couldn't have certain things and also be healthy. I couldn't have certain things and still be in a harmonious state. That is scarcity. That is lack. And while that's not necessarily related to money, I wanted to find these different holes in my life, these areas where I felt lack and scarcity. And one area really was food. So I switched the narrative, add rather than subtract. And I have definitely benefited from adding rather than subtracting. I feel the best that I have felt in honestly, it feels like 2 years. I haven't felt at home in my body since 2021 probably. And now I just feel so at home and so free. Why? because I'm adding rather than subtracting. I'm operating from a physical state of abundance rather than a physical state of scarcity and lack. And while that might make sense to some of you, it may not make sense to others of you, and that's okay. All right, so the concept is to add rather than subtract. This allows you to really work on hormonal harmony without giving up things you enjoy. The final principle, because I wrote down 3, I'm trying not to be too long-winded, is only in Eden. Now, this is one of my favorite ones because honestly, it welcomes in ancestral living, ancestral eating, and just the more traditional ways of doing things. And let me be honest with you. I know that's not for everyone, but I know that's for a lot of people, right? And so I'm one of those people where welcoming in these ancient things, I'm here for it. It helps me, and it helps me understand the evolution of my body. That said, let's talk about the lab-grown meat, okay? So with everything going on in our world, we have to treat our body as the temple that it is, okay? The synthetic hormones, synthetic toxins, the filler ingredients, we know those are all bad for us. And in full transparency, lab-grown meat is no different, okay? If it looks like a duck, acts like a duck, seems like it's a duck, and even quacks like a duck, and maybe even waddles, is a duck. Don't let these people swindle you. I know that we're in this society where people are trying to figure themselves out, and that's fine. I'm going to just leave that. I'll let the chips fall where they may on that one, right? But lab-grown meat is just a more marketable way to say genetically modified meat. It is grown from the cell of an animal. However, it is not from the animal. And morally, I think there's so much wrong with it. I feel as if we are now in society trying to play God and create things that quite literally do not and did not exist. And when it comes to this lab-grown meat, I am all freaking set. You know, they didn't have lab-grown meat in the Garden of Eden, and there's probably a reason for that. I know it sounds so silly, but they probably didn't have high fructose corn syrup in the Garden of Eden. You know, there's probably a reason for that. And let me be clear. I'm not saying you have to eliminate all of these things. What I'm saying is, if they had it in the Garden of Eden, great. It's probably good to go. And if they didn't have it in the Garden of Eden, maybe, just maybe, we want to find an alternative. I don't know what they ate in the garden, but what I'm almost positive of is they didn't eat lab-grown meat. Okay? And I also want to say that I did take quite a bit of time to look into this lab-grown meat situation, really to understand it. And here's what I think is really relevant to you. What is it? It's meat that's been altered. It's been grown from an animal cell. No, it is not considered vegan because it comes from an animal cell, but I'm not sure we can really call it meat either. Furthermore, another thing that I noticed is as I looked into 2 of the brands mentioned in these companies, one of them is owned by Bill Gates, which I thought was super interesting. If you know, you know, and if you don't know, I feel bad for you. But I digress. One thing I noticed is they kept trying to say that this lab-grown meat is better for the environment than like traditional agriculture and conventional agriculture. And while that is probably true, I highly, highly doubt that it is better than regenerative farming and permaculture, which does more for the environment than probably any type of lab-grown meat ever could. Furthermore, I found it interesting that I think they said 10 years ago, it cost about $300,000 to develop this first specimen, that's what it is at the end of the day, of lab grown meat. And now it might cost people $50, and they might roll it out in San Francisco, and I believe the other place was DC. And I thought that was very interesting placement of like who gets access to it first. If you know, you know. Not only this, but another thing I found really, really interesting was the fact that they don't talk about the elimination of people's jobs and how basically mass producing lab grown meat is going to negatively impact cattle and cattle farming, cattle ranching, all of that. That was a very interesting thing to me, because there's a lot that they did say and then there's a lot that they didn't say. And oftentimes when something like that is so obscure, there means there's a negative side effect that we're not talking about. In addition to this, the way that they said that the FDA had no questions about this and simply approved it just really threw me for a loop. But we know what the FDA has done over the last few years, so I don't really need to get into it. But I say all this to say that all of the regulations and questions that we normally have around food all of a sudden were not raised when it really came to this lab-grown meat situation, which is why I personally, if I have a choice, will not be putting it in my body. Not only this, but it encourages me even more to keep learning about regenerative agriculture. And I hope it encourages you as well, because this stuff is getting really questionable. Now, like I said, my third point and my third principle is only in Eden. I embrace different aspects of ancestral living, and I encourage my clients to do the same, even if they're not believers. That's okay. The reason I do that is because regardless of whether or not you're a believer, there's a chance that you don't want synthetic food, like crap in your food. You don't want synthetic hormones, growth hormones, any of that, right? And so when it comes to your food or the products that you put on your body, for instance, you want to know, was this in the Garden of Eden? If it was, amazing. And if it wasn't, look for an alternative. And I know this sounds so silly and you're probably like, Berri, I can't believe you. Please just trust me when I say this, okay? And I don't say trust me lightly. I just know that I want the best for myself. And I also know that I'm an example for you all as to like how to achieve hormonal harmony, right? I know that I'm a living, breathing example of it. But after 6 years of working in the women's health space, I've truly found that these 3 principles are a guiding light that seem to be at the intersection of fact, when we're talking about actual science and not pseudoscience of like COVID. I said what I said and I meant it. Sorry if it was aggressive. Not sorry. But they are literally the intersection of fact, follow through, so things people can actually do, and faith. And that's something that people believe. Faith is a substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And as somebody who truly believes that their purpose and calling is to like kind of steward over their gift, but also other people, especially when it comes to health and healing, I just thought it was just imperative for me to share these 3 principles. And in case you didn't know, principles are really like a foundational truth. And I think that a lot of us haven't thought about principles in a long time. So as we close out today's episode, what I really would love for you to do is start thinking about either one of the 3 principles I just shared: stress less and live more, add rather than subtract, and only in Eden, and figure out which one you might share with a friend, or figure out which one you're going to actually apply in your own life. And I would really love if you took some time to share with me, literally send me a DM over on Instagram, what principle you live by or use for your health. Even, I mean, obviously you can use the ones I'm sharing with you, but like if you have your own, you're like, no, sis, like this is what I'm all about. I would love to know. And that's because I'm always open to expanding my horizon and really looking at things from like a different lens. Well, with that being said, I hope today's episode has been supportive to you. Also, can we just get a round of applause for the fact that this episode went live on a Thursday? Like, who is she? I'm trying to get back into like the swing of things. Taking a little bit longer, but here we are. Nonetheless, I love you so much. I mean it. Talk to you soon.